I now call to order the January 16th, 2025 meeting of the Equity Committee of the Board of Education of Baltimore County. In accordance with Board Policy 8311, the chair of a committee at their discretion and after consultation with the staff liaison may convene an in-person committee meeting. Otherwise, all committee meetings will be held electronically. Today's meeting is being held virtually and broadcast through Microsoft Teams. I'm sorry, on my end, I'm hearing an echo. Is everyone else muted? So today's meeting is being held virtually and broadcast through Microsoft Teams. In order to efficiently conduct this meeting, committee members will state their name before speaking. Ms. Seabolt, please call the roll of board members to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Ms. Chike-Kalu?
Present.
Ms. Harvey?
Present.
Ms. Stilusky?
Present.
Ms. Frempong?
Present. Thank you. Ms. Seabolt, please call the roll of staff members on the Equity Committee participating in today's meeting.
Mr. Handy?
Present.
Thank you. And Ms. Charlie Green is not able to join us. She is in another meeting. She will join us if possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So on the agenda today, we have the Equity Strategic Plan, and for that, I call on Mr. Douglas Handy.
Thank you, Ms. Frempong. Good afternoon again, everyone. It's my pleasure to bring you the strategic plan from my department, Equity and Cultural Proficiency. This was a presentation we had planned for you all earlier, but that agenda was full, so we decided to bring it back to this meeting. So let's move forward. Next slide, please. So want to start by framing our strategic plan really within the context of the greater system of BCPS. So in 2023, 2024 school year, when Dr. Rogers began her tenure as superintendent, the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency was shifted to the division of the Chief of Staff to emphasize that the work of the department is system-wide and it covers all areas of BCPS. The purpose of the strategic plan is to ensure that my team aligns our work to Dr. Rogers' priorities and to our team's values, beliefs, mission, and vision. In developing the strategic plan, my team confers with the divisions of schools, curriculum and instruction, operations, fiscal services, and human resources to ensure that equity in action is the focus throughout BCPS. Also, my team will solicit multi-stakeholder input on the plan in an effort to promote systems and structures for academic programs, social emotional supports, and business operations that are equitable for all BCPS students, teachers, leaders, staff, and community members. Next slide, please. So here we have the timeline for the strategic plan. This is an activity that my team does every year. So for the plan I'm going to share with you this evening, we started developing that plan in May 2024. We came back in September 2024 to complete the first draft of the plan. We were trying to be flexible and responsive to a lot of our summer professional development. You may recall from presentations you received from fellow staff members, we had a robust professional development schedule that encompassed really all members of BCPS, particularly our school-based staff. So once we participated in that professional development, they gave us some clarity on what we need to do with our strategic plan. So we did complete that first draft in September 2024. In October of that same year, we incorporated feedback and revised the plan. The original plan was to present this strategic plan to you all, to this committee in November. And as I mentioned earlier, with that agenda being full, you all did agree as a committee to review the plan in a subsequent meeting, and that brings us to today, January 2025, where I'm presenting the plan to you. Going forward, we'll review the plan quarterly, and I will bring updates to you all before the end of the year, but we're going to make sure that our plan is updated to reflect the status of each of the initiatives in the plan. And also I want to emphasize that the plan that I'm sharing with you and the timeline these are all subject to change based on the BCPS strategic plan, which is currently under development. Next slide, please. So our first step in identifying the values that we hold as a team was to identify the values of each individual team member. So once each team member shared their individual values, we discussed those values and came to consensus on the values that would represent us as a whole. Through this process of identifying our values, we also engaged in community building, which is a core component of our work. And you will see community building as a theme that is woven throughout our strategic plan. So the values we identify for our team are what you see on the screen: accountability, authenticity, compassion, honesty, humanity, perspective, relationships, and respect. Next slide, please. Once we identified our team's values, we went on to develop our team's belief statement. And you have that on the screen in front of you. That statement, the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency believes that to obtain equitable outcomes in our system, we must promote authentic relationships rooted in humanity and grounded in compassion and dignity. Next slide, please. With our team's belief serving as a guide, we went on to develop our mission statement. In that statement, DECP works to build the capacity of teachers, leaders, and staff to create inclusive environments that honor every person's race, ability, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, including gender expression, language, immigration status, and socioeconomic status, to increase achievement for all students and to provide a variety of pathways to prepare students for college and careers. Next slide, please. And then the final piece of our framework describes what we consider to be the end state that we are working toward, and that's reflected in our vision statement. DECP promotes systems and structures that provide support for all BCPS students, teachers, leaders, staff, and community members in which equity and access are embedded in all areas of academic programs, social emotional supports, and business operations. Next slide, please. So everything I've shared to this point, you could think of as the front matter to our strategic plan. Now we are going to explore the actual content of the plan. That content starts with the 4 priority areas that our team chose to focus on during the school year. These 4 focus areas were chosen because we believe that they would enable us to make the greatest impact on achieving the mission that we set forth earlier in the plan. The priority areas also represent the systems and structures that we would leverage as we work towards our vision. So the 4 priority areas identified by my team are here on the screen: coaching and consultation, professional learning, equity liaisons, and partnerships. Next slide, please. So for each of the 4 priority areas, we included 8 components that help us organize our work. And those 8 components are, first, and most importantly, alignment to the BCPS priority areas. And those 4 areas are academic achievement, infrastructure, safety and climate, and highly effective teachers, leaders, and staff. Secondly, there's a goal stated for each of the components. We look at our year of implementation. Many components we want to put in place this year. Some we use this year as a planning year with the idea of implementing in subsequent years. We also have our target audience that's going to be primarily affected by the particular component. We list the activities that are going to be involved in carrying out that component of the plan. We always include our internal and external partners that will join us in the work. We make sure that the person from my team, person or persons who are responsible for carrying out the component of the plan. And then we have this last section we call consideration notes, but it allows us really to capture anything of note when we establish that component. And then as we go through our status updates, we use that area to make our updates as well. Next slide, please. So the first area we mentioned is coaching and consultation. The goal for that area is to collaborate with school and office leaders in an ongoing and responsive process of collective inquiry to achieve better results for the students they serve. Next slide, please. Our second area is professional learning. The goal for that area is to foster community with participants while holding space for personal reflection and capacity building to sustain courageous conversations about race and historically marginalized populations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Then equity liaisons, which again, I'm always happy to report, this is a mandatory extra duty activity for each of our schools this year, allowing us to really extend our reach into all of our school buildings. The goal for this particular area is to develop the capacity of equity liaisons to work with their school leadership teams to create equitable and inclusive educational and workplace environments for all students and staff. Next slide, please. And then our fourth area is partnerships. The goal there is to collaborate with internal and external partners to cultivate more equitable and culturally proficient environments across all aspects of BCPS operations, ultimately leading to improved outcomes for students, staff, and the broader community. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to ensure that our plan exists within the greater context of the BCPS strategic plan, the BCPS priorities. So how is the equity strategic plan framed around the 4 BCPS priority areas? So for these next few slides, I'm going to give some examples of how we align our equity strategic plan to these 4 priority areas for our system overall. Next slide, please. So first, we'll start with academic achievement and looking at 2 aspects of our plan, 2 of our plan's areas, professional learning and equity liaisons. So in terms of professional learning, we align by providing opportunities for reflection and actionable steps to dismantle inequities linked to overarching equity goals. Also by revising and developing professional learning to be responsive to current system needs. So in this case, we're talking about the curriculum that our team develops for our professional learning, which is really what that second statement speaks to. And then also when we actually deliver the professional development. So those are 2 aspects of our professional learning or professional development. Secondly, the alignment is there. We're working with our equity liaisons. We're supporting them and working with school leadership to create equitable and inclusive environments, analyzing equity data, and advocating for strategies to address gaps in access and services. Next slide, please. In terms of the BCPS goal of safety and culture, we focused, just as an example, on 2 aspects of the equity strategic plan, those 2 being coaching and consultation and partnerships. In terms of coaching and consultation, we align by supporting the creation of inclusive educational and workplace cultures and assessing readiness for equity work. Also by supporting schools in setting clear expectations and consistent responses to protect and preserve safe learning environments. And regarding partnerships, our alignment is in providing empowering communities to foster personal growth and navigate challenges through student mentoring programs. Next slide, please. All right, so our third area is highly effective teachers, leaders, and staff. We'll use 2 examples from our equity strategic plan, professional learning and partnerships. So first, alignment through professional learning is realized by partnering with office and school staff to offer professional learning opportunities across BCPS. And through partnerships, the alignment is there by supporting efforts to recruit and retain a diverse and effective workforce. Next slide, please. And our 4th and final area for our BCPS focus is infrastructure. The 2 examples we're going to look at for infrastructure are both from our partnership focus in our equity plan. One example of alignment is by collaborating with internal and external partners to cultivate equitable and culturally proficient environments. And a second example, also related to partnerships, aligning by establishing an advisory of external partners to coordinate support and services for BCPS students and personnel. And one example of that is our equity advisory that actually, is part of the work of the board equity committee as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. And then just to wrap it up, we know that the plan is only effective when we see impacts and outcomes and positive changes in those impacts and outcomes. So to make sure that we are realizing the effect of the plan, we'll work with our Division of Research, Assessment and Accountability. Also, we'll work with the chiefs across the divisions to identify ways to capture the impact of our efforts. So once this school year comes to a close, we should be able to look at these impacts in a comprehensive fashion and see how our plan actually did impact outcomes on BCPS as a system. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I will turn it back over to Ms. Frimpong for any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Handy. Are there any questions for Mr. Handy? Ms. Delusky, you have a question?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. As always, it's very clearly laid out, and you know, the equity lens is certainly there. I have two questions. The first was on that last slide with infrastructure, that second one. Let's see, I think one back, yes. So number two with the partnerships. Are there partnerships in place now that you're already working with, or is this something that's a work in progress? And I'm only asking because I was just curious a little bit more in terms of what that number two actually looks like. That was the only one that I kind of felt like, okay, just a little bit vague for me in terms of what that would look like, or what that already looks like. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lusky. I appreciate the question. So I'll start with, it is always a work in progress for us, where we're always trying to develop more partnerships. However, as you had also mentioned, we do have some in place. And there's actually, well, a couple partnerships we've pointed out. One would actually be this committee. So that's one. The Equity Advisory is another that we pointed out. We also have what we call our Teacher Equity Academy. We call it the T Academy for short. We consider them a partner. I've mentioned them before, but they do help us extend our reach. So being a team that's relatively small, when we provide professional learning to our equity liaisons, those members of our T Academy are instrumental. And right now it's about 10. We're always looking to grow, but they really do help us deliver that professional development. We also do count in our student mentoring programs, because we're able to do those really through partnering with the school-based staff who are the lead mentors. We've also, like we had a conference early in the year, CCBC, so we'll partner with, CCBC. We're always looking to, partner to increase those mentoring programs as well. Something that we're starting to develop here recently is collaborating with our, between my team and the Office of Multilingual Learning and multilingual achievement, to be more supportive of our multilingual learners, students and community as well. So we have some, there's a partnership in the works. I'm hoping to bring back some updates on that as we start to form that. And those are some of the key partnerships we have already. But also I do want to make it clear that, we are open to form additional partnerships as needed to make sure that students and staff community members feel supported.
Thank you. And I will have to look back at my notes from board meetings, but we've had a number of speakers at board meetings that have talked about ways that they are supporting their local school and the local school community in terms of working with students. So I will look back at my notes, and I will email you any specific names and organizations that I have, but there's been several presenters where they want to expand their outreach, and they're offering their time and services. So one, I will email you any names that when I look back at my board notes I find, and two, that's something that we all can keep on our radar from here forward is, as the speakers discuss their comments and concerns at public comment, for individuals or groups that have something to offer this really important committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lusky.
And most importantly, to the students.
Yes.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Like I said, especially if we're talking about any underserved groups, groups that appear to be
Yes.
marginalized, anywhere we see, right, say gaps in services, students struggling academically, right, you name it. So thank you.
No, I can,
appreciate the
and I'm
connection.
sorry I don't have that information, but I think there's definitely some good matches that can be made.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Welcome.
and then my other question is just in terms of like baseline data, because it
Mhm.
sounds like this strategic plan is just starting to unfold.
Mhm.
Is there like a baseline set of data that you are using to then be able to track progress? I know this is a really hard area to track, but I was just curious. And thank you for, as always, for answering my questions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, we don't have the baseline data. And, that's certainly where I would say most effective plans start. I think what's going to be really critical, and I guess if you look at even like correlation versus causation, we're really going to rely on school leaders, school staff, any staff we work with. When we see positive outcomes, like the same type of data that you all receive in full board meetings, we really do rely on folks to say, the work of the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency was a major part of moving this data. So, we really look at I guess the overall school system as a metric, if you will. If we're looking at, say our mentoring programs that we help support, we certainly can look at how individual students have progressed. But as you point out, Mr. Lusky, right, it is, we're trying to do this like transformational work. But we do rely on, again, our partners, folks we collaborate with, to say that our work has helped and helped move their data. So in that sense, you're probably gonna hear more qualitative data come out from our involvement, if you will, that informs the quantitative, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lusky. And if you could include the Equity Council members on the email that you're going to have with the partners, I think that'll be helpful, because that way too, if any of the rest of us have additional partners, we could all kind of, have a consensus and not be overlapping one another. So,
Absolutely.
thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Handy? Okay, so I have a couple. The first one is with the liaisons. I'm always happy to hear, as you said, Mr. Handy, that piece about the liaisons and that it is a mandatory EDA at the schools. So at this point, have all the schools identified their equity liaison?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Frimpong. I believe they have. I can confirm that. We did have a symposium, a winter symposium. It was December 12th. And I know as we went through and looked at registration, I believe everyone did have a liaison named, but I can check and confirm that. I would say the last time we checked and there were any schools missing, I want to say it was like less than 10 at that time, but I think we got them all identified, but I will confirm that and let you know.
Great, thank you, because that kind of is leading into my next question about when did we reach that. So I know sometimes it has been a little bit of a struggle in the past with some schools. So hopefully with the mandatory EDA, which of course provides also the stipend, that is helping to get staff excited about participating in this. The next question is, with the timeline, this is the presentation right now on January of 2025, but from the timeline, like on slide 4, you start this for 24-25 school year, it was started in May. And then it looks like, oh, thank you for changing to the slide. Okay. And then, excuse me, oh my goodness, excuse me, October, the plan is revised. So is the plan completed in, I guess it was completed in November, and then are we looking at that is going to be the same time frame as well for the 25-26 school year?
Thank you, Ms. Frimpong. So I will say we hit a few snags this year. So if I look at the previous year's plan, we actually had a tighter timeline. And to your question, For 25-26, we will still use May 2025 as a start point. However, if I look at September, like when the school year opens, late August, early September, the plan is to have something completed at that point. So we want to have a completed plan a lot earlier. And then I would like to bring this, to this committee on an annual basis, but there were some delays this year. So we really aim to have that plan in place when the school year starts. Of course, as it states at the bottom of the screen, being responsive to anything happening system-wide, anything that, Dr. Rogers sets forth. But we really want to have a plan in place by September, I would say. And I would say final, not just the first draft, but like I said, really more of a final plan.
Thank you. So this is something then that is done every year. It's not a multi-year plan.
It's not a multi-year plan. If we go through, and we really keep this in a really a spreadsheet, essentially, we'll have aspects of the plan that we know we cannot accomplish this year, and we'll say, okay, we're going to plan for this for the following year. So there are some aspects of the plan that do lead into subsequent years, but the way it's designed, it's really designed to be a plan for each year as opposed to a multi-year plan.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then I think this was really laid out well, and thank you for, the different categories with laying things out, and then even within that, the subcategories. So for example, slide 18, you have highly effective teachers, leaders, and staff, which we know is one of the superintendent's priorities. And then for number 2, but the partnerships, you talk about supporting efforts to recruit and retain a diverse and effective workforce. So for example, I know this year your staff and you were actually involved as part of some of these job fairs. And so that's one of the ways that you guys are supporting efforts. But can you speak to maybe just one from each of those priorities, a little bit more specific about some of those examples or some of the things that your office is doing to, this good work that you guys are doing in order to, reach some of the outcomes that you've laid out? Okay,
sure. So why don't we start, if we go back to academic achievement, I'll just go in order of the system priorities. So again, I spoke a little bit about how we do professional learning. So again, we develop the curriculum in-house, if you will. We do pull from, research and multiple sources. So for this year, there's a couple of things we have going on. One, we have a professional learning community that's part of our principal leadership development. So when we look at the monthly, they call them, PLD for short, Principals Leadership Development. We do have an opportunity for principals to opt into or select a professional learning community to be a part of. Ours is on sharpening or really increasing your capacity to lead for equity. And we had, a group of about 12 folks, mostly principals, some from central office, who are participating in that PLC. So that's one way we engage with professional learning with the community. We also have a couple of, long-term commitments, if you will. There's a program called Mentoring Matters that is really led by our ESPBC bargaining unit. And it's an effort to provide our office professionals and our paraeducators with consistent ongoing professional learning. And I'm really happy to report that when that group meets monthly, these are, I think first or second year office professionals or paraprofessionals. The one recurring item on the agenda is equity in action. And I partner with one of my specialists, and she's actually the lead. So I'm really there to support her. But every month we do an hour session, over the course of about 10 months, over the course of the school year, with those office professionals and, with our paraeducators. Trying to think of another example. Well, let me move on to equity liaisons. I talked about the symposium in December. We have another symposium scheduled for the spring. The symposium in December was critical. Some of the focal areas, we had folks from our Division of Research, Assessment, Accountability come in and talk about how to work with data, how to work with school leaders and the school's progress plans. We really want our equity liaisons to be adept at analyzing data and really getting to the focus of our school system, and that's academic achievement. So we made sure that we had sessions related to these critical skills. So the data analysis, we had another session on facilitating learning. The expectation for many of our liaisons is that they're leading professional learning within their school buildings. Sometimes my team will be able to go in and plan and or support them during the delivery. And we need to make sure we're building capacity of our equity liaisons to do that work in their school buildings. Another session, we had we had some wellness sessions. That's the other thing we focus on. So we have colleagues from our human resource department. They did like a wellness session, again, making sure that, you saw our focus area and our values around humanity. We want to make sure folks are taking care of themselves as they work to take care of fellow staff and, of course, of our students. And then also with equity liaisons, we have professional learning communities set up within feeder patterns. So if you look at from elementary, middle to high school, my team of specialists has helped to facilitate the PLCs within those feeder patterns. They happen virtually. Some might happen face to face. And again, we're helping equity liaisons to build their leadership capacity while remaining supported by my team. And again, everything here is with a focus, again, on academic outcomes. We really want to make sure that our liaisons are working towards improving academic achievement. So we'll look at the next slide, safety and culture. So coaching and consultation. One way we do this is sometimes the most reactive part of our work. And if a situation happens in a school, we will get calls. And at that time, it could be a brief consultation, with a school leader on an aspect. Students might experience harm related to their identities. There could be issues among staff, of a sensitive nature, again, related to race, other aspects of identity. So we will consult with school leaders around this. Sometimes it's long-term coaching that occurs. There might be, say it's a team, grade level team that's struggling to work together, and we're trying to figure out why that's the case. And we believe that there's, some aspects of cultural proficiency that really could be involved. We will, put together some long-term coaching and perhaps stay in a more sustained fashion to try to address that. Again, the idea is that learning environment, that work environment is safe and affirming for all students and staff. As far as the partnerships, I'll go back to the discussion I was having with Ms. Delusky, again, around mentoring. That's an example. Ms. Rempong, I know you and some of other committee members are very familiar with some of the work we were doing in relation to Maryland State Department of Education's efforts around equity and excellence for Black boys, academic achievement, social emotional environments, that type of thing. So we're continuing to do some work with our Black boys, also work with Black girls. And again, anytime we hear from a school that they need support around any particular student groups, we are there to do that work in partnership with them. Next, we'll look at highly effective teachers, leaders, and staff. As you point out, Ms. Rempong, we work very closely with our Division of Human Resources, and I do want to highlight the work at the division level. So if we look at Mr. McCall as the chief, he's had us come to their division retreat. This is the second year in a row we've done that, so we have a presence there. We have been working with the human resource leadership team to make sure our work is starting to drill down even more within the different units within that division. And I also want to highlight some work we've done with our staffing and licensure group in particular. And we started going through our baseline 10-hour, really our foundational equity professional learning. We call it Engage Y Equity. So we did that. It involves all of our human resource officers that do the staffing work. the key component to this recruitment piece that we talk about. Also, professional learning, again, talked to one of my team members this morning. She was out helping to facilitate a professional learning community within one of our elementary schools. Again, we're looking to be responsive to the needs of each school. We certainly have some plans that are systemic and, things that we want to do and set forth. And it's very critical that we're responsive to the needs of schools. So, sometimes we'll see a school where, um, frankly, that the academic achievement across the school might be a concern. So what do we need to do to push in from an applied equity lens and help staff understand how to do that? So that's a big part of how we work with our teachers, leaders, and staff to support their work. And then lastly, we have our infrastructure. I do want to say, if we look at our operations side, this is an area that, again, we're always trying to establish more of a foothold. I am happy to report this morning, one of my specialists, actually it's our specialist who's assigned to work with the divisions that are part of operations. She was working with our transportation group. And this was, I want to say, the second or third meeting this year. When we do interact with staff, we ask that it not be episodic. We want to make sure that there's a plan to bring us back. We want to give time for folks to reflect, perhaps look at some data, to wrestle with some concepts, ask questions, so we want to make sure there's an ongoing relationship throughout the course of any type of engagement we have with folks. So transportation is one example of, we look at our infrastructure more on the operations side. It's something we've done. We're also starting to look at our central office equity liaisons again. We talked a little, quite a bit about our school-based equity liaisons. We also have, last year we had started an equity liaison group for our central offices, and we want to really revitalize that group and bring them back. So that's something we're actually sending out some communication actually this week by tomorrow to start to re-engage around that. And then the partnerships, we talked a little about that as well. I'm really looking forward to see what you all have to share as board members. Again, if folks are coming to you all looking to establish partnerships because of the work of my team, we do extend out, across BCPS. We're certainly looking to support anything we can do to make sure there's a greater sense of belonging for all of our students. And then we know that's going to help to fortify our students in terms of academic achievement. So I think I'll pause at this point just to see if that is what you were looking for, Ms. Frimpong, as far as some examples.
It definitely was. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thank you. I think that it's really important, the work that you do, that your department does and your team members do, and how you're able to partner with others. With the central office equity liaison and the equity lead liaison groups that you were talking about, is that something that already consists of established people, or is that something that, for example, because we're in budget season, so I guess I'm looking at, is that something that would work within the existing budget that's as it's proposed, or is that something we would look at needing money for that group and that liaison?
Thank you for that question. It would exist within, I say, our current budget, wherever we do land as far as the budget. It's not something we're requesting any type of fiscal note for. It's really a matter of, convening that group. We do ask, and we started this last year. However, we did have to pause as we were preparing for the budget, as you all know, and, Dr. Rogers talked about it earlier this week. There were some staffing impacts with the budget. We understand that's a reality. So, folks frankly wanted to, make sure they knew where they were going to be going forward. So some of the delays we had on really establishing our central office was a result of that, just, watching some of the movement and some of the realignment, reorganization that was happening. But there's no need for any additional funding. So once we find, what next year looks like, as far as staff, as far as who's in what office, we're going to continue to work with the staff, again, without having to allocate any additional funding. But we do want to have central office staff look at equity related goals, apply an equity lens to what's happening in their offices as far as how what they're doing is, translating again to these 4 priority areas for BCPS. And that academic achievement is always like our North Star. So we'll be able to do that, within any budgetary environment, frankly, once we know, who's a part of what aspect of our organization.
Great, thank you. I have more questions, but I'm going to pause to see if there are any other board members who have questions or comments. Okay, I'm not seeing them. Okay, so Mr. Handy, you spoke about the cultural proficiency underneath safety and culture, and about you're able to put together some coaching just for kind of educating. And again, for those who are listening, can you talk about what that means when we're talking about the idea of cultural proficiency or cultural responsiveness of a teacher or a staff member in interacting with our students?
Sure, Ms. Frimpong, thank you for that question. So a lot of times you'll hear folks talk about implicit bias, and I've recently been doing quite a few presentations on that. So I think it's a good starting point. I like to start with identity. We each have identity. So I think about the multiple identities that make up who I am, my race, gender, you name it. And a matter of fact, if you all recall, as board members, when we did our professional learning last year, we looked at the social identity wheel, just so we were all, being able to identify and reflect upon our identity. So if you think about the identity of let's say a classroom teacher, think about how that classroom teacher was socialized, how they have to have implicit bias. It's just going to happen because that's what happens to human beings. It's part of our makeup. If we have a brain and we've been socialized, we're going to have implicit biases. And what happens when that implicit bias impacts the way that that teacher interacts with the student? And it's been researched that these biases often do turn into, number one, sometimes lower expectations for particular students. And I am, thinking about perhaps Black or Brown students, or students who are multilingual learners, students who are receiving special education services. And if the identity of that teacher, any biases that teacher have goes unchecked, then it can result in some unfavorable outcomes. So, we'll go in and take a look at, a data set, and we'll see how students are doing. We'll break that down and disaggregate it, by student groups. So we're talking about, again, race, gender, receipt of special services, you name it, and find out, well, what's happening with this group of students, or it might be even an individual student, and, really trying to push in and find out the root cause of some of this data, why it looks the way it does. And it does turn into sometimes, a specialist from my team talking to a principal, to an assistant principal, school leadership, talking directly with that teacher about, what's happening, and always asking why and trying to get to that root cause. So for us, we look at the cultural proficiency of each staff member being important. So, if I'm interacting with you all on this committee, if there's a cultural mismatch or a cultural divide, and it's causing misunderstanding, or an imbalance in the power dynamic, and someone's being harmed, then that's a problem that we look to address. And when I talk about equity, I tell folks in the snapshot, look for the gaps. So if you see gaps in academic performance among student groups, and you start to ask, why is that? That's where we need to apply equity. Like, what's happening where students are showing lower achievement, and there seems to be some predictability in the pattern, because perhaps, students receiving special education services seem to be the ones with lower achievement. Why is that happening? So again, we want to make sure, as adults, we're interrogating our beliefs, our approach to teaching and learning, and doing whatever we can as adults to create educational environments in which each of our students will thrive. So that's how we really, dig in. as an example, and I can go on forever and ever, talk about it. So I'm gonna pause, but just to see if that's again getting to what you were looking for, Ms. Rimpon.
It is definitely. Thank you.
I do want to say one other thing. I'm gonna be brief because I talked a lot about academics, and we also see some, patterns often with discipline, and that's another area. Again, I'm going to apply the same aspects of identity that I started with, and again, the data does show that sometimes the behaviors uh, could be similar, but the outcomes could be different depending on, how a student presents, the student's identity, et cetera, et cetera. So I did want to point out the behavior aspects along with the academic aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Handy, and thank you for also, as you talk about that with, special education as part of our service groups, as well as our children of color that are sometimes, excuse me, unfortunately negatively impacted. And so looking at that data and again, understanding that why is it that if we have similar behavior but different outcomes and
Mhm.
starting to really address some of the I guess, as you would say, implicit biases that are occurring and creating those outcomes. Um, that is it for my questions. I'm going to check one more time to see if any of my board members have questions. I do not see any, so I do want to say thank you. Oh,
Yeah. Oh,
go ahead, Miss Chikekulu.
yes. So firstly, thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Handy. And so
You're welcome.
I had a few, but my first one was, is there kind of an action plan or any proactive steps that we can take to support schools that don't have the same wealth or the same access to all of these community partners because they might be more prevalent in one region versus other regions, whether it's because of socioeconomic reasons. And so because the DCP program really relies heavily on these partnerships to implement these equity initiatives, are there just any steps or any plans that we can take to really ensure that students still have that same equal access, even if there's resource disparity?
Mhm. Thank you, Ms. Chikekulu. I appreciate the question. So one thing we're looking to do is pursue more grants. And again, we heard Dr. Rogers talk about the importance of doing so, especially in tough fiscal times. A lot of the grants we pursue will actually look to support student groups or communities such as the ones you mentioned. And that's, communities that have not received resources that are more in need. So we do try to do that work through our grant pursuits of grants. We also starting to work closer with our community school facilitators. I know you all had a presentation to the full board this school year around that. So that's another group that we're looking to work with continuously to make sure that we're staying in line. Because if you look at how our community schools are set up, of course, they're looking to provide resources where resources have been lacking. So I guess those are two ways that we are looking to be actionable. And then, we talked earlier about our partners that we're looking to identify. And that's why we say we're always trying to grow those partnership ranks for us so we can actually do that work. But often it is just what you talked about, Ms. Chikekulu, looking to be more involved, be more supportive, disrupt inequities in communities that really have been underserved and are really most in need. That really is our priority. I'll say one last thing, is even our Title II work. I was just meeting with some fellow staff. We've got some exciting work happening, and once it gets established, I'd like to report that out to you all as well. But it's focused around our schools that are most in need. So our TSI and CSI schools. So I know you all have heard some about that through your reports as well. But so we're always focusing on the neediest and as a priority, and then seeing how we can perhaps take that to scale to affect other student populations as well.
Thank you so much. And then for my next question, I was wondering, could you just elaborate on what the student mentoring program could entail, especially for those watching? And then within the DCP, are there just any mentorship or just peer-led initiatives that kind of allow students to still take the active role in fostering equity, even if they are working with the equity liaisons and other staff members within the schoolhouse?
No, thank you for that question. So a little bit about our student mentoring. Really, when it was about 3 years ago when the state was pushing grant funds out for the academic equity and excellence for Black boys. We did have 3 schools that were part of a pilot group. It's about 12 schools across the state. We also, the following year, we took the mentoring programs to scale for all of our middle schools. So we had mentoring programs in each of our middle schools for Black boys. Had some, funding challenges with budgets. We weren't able to really maintain that level of funding. We do have schools that are still active with some of their mentoring programs. We also started hearing of a need from our partners in the Division of Schools, that there were schools where we had Black girls who were in need of a higher level of support. And so we started some programs last year to support our Black girls. So this year we're looking to do a couple of conferences that would involve those mentoring groups. So we're thinking about like working with CCBC, still in the idea stage, but we might do on one day, a conference on one campus for our girls, our Black girls, and then another campus for Black boys. So that's one of the ideas. The other point that you brought up, which is intriguing and something we want to do, is really establish our connection with our students a lot more. And this is the first year since I've been in this role. This is year 4 for me. This is the first year where I have not had a student intern for our department. And I miss that interaction because it keeps me tied into what, students are experiencing throughout the school year. But one of our plans, and this goes back to even the multi-year planning aspect, we really do want to establish a student advisory for our department. And I think that would give an opportunity for what you described, Mr. Chika-Kalu, which is, students that are working with equity liaisons. They would be a great part of this. There might be, sometimes I just tend to meet students, along the way, and they express, a real passion for the type of work that my team and I do. So we want to, increase that pool, laying some plans this year. Hopefully by next year, we'll start to actually recruit some of those students and bring them into the mix. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention. Let me see. I think that's probably the most systemic type of work we're looking to do. But that far, as far as the student advisor, that's something that we're hoping to build out, actually populate that next year.
Thank you so much. And that's really exciting to hear. And then also just kind of, I know you don't because it's just a program that's launching, but are there any specific outcomes that the DCP expects to achieve through particularly the coaching and the consulting sessions with schools? And then also just outside of just fostering that culture and building that natural environment of equity and accessibility and just equality within the school system, are there just any specific outcomes we're looking for? And then kind of how has the department measured these and measured whether these outcomes are met, or is there a framework moving forward about how you're imagining just that metric?
So, and thank you for that. In general, we do want to work on our metrics more. And I'm thinking back to even, what Ms. Selesky asked. For what we use currently, if we're working with schools, we really look at the school's metrics. So I'm thinking about, star ratings, for example. We have schools that are struggling around their star ratings, that they're in a situation where they feel like they might slip backwards in the star rating. I know we have schools, most 5-star schools in the state. So we have quite a few accolades to be proud of. And we know we still have schools that need more support in moving their schools forward. So that's the measure we use. And that's why it's very important that we work with our principals, also with the executive directors from the Division of Schools, really with Dr. Jones' whole division, if you will, also CNI, Dr. DiDonato. So we really want to make sure we're in alignment with what schools are doing. So I would say we look at our metrics as their metrics as our metrics, if that makes sense. If they feel like we're helping them to move forward, I'm going to go back to, a debrief I had with one of my team members early this morning. She's been working with a school for, about 3 or 4 months now, really going over there weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, really embedding herself. And, she said the principal was saying, we're starting to see some movement in our academic data. We're starting to see some changes. And so the principal saying, because of the work that my team member was doing in these professional learning communities, how she helped to facilitate conversations related to, gaps in the data, and started to, help teachers understand, how some of their actions and beliefs and mindsets might have actually had them interact with students in a way that had a negative impact on their academic achievement. Once we get to that point, and then we start to determine what it takes to change that, to get a better outcome, then we know that we're moving in the right direction. And then the ultimate measure really is going to be the same measures you all see as board members. The MCAP data, the curriculum-based assessment. So the same data sets you all look at, really we consider to be part of our accountability too as a team. And then, the behavior data as well. We really want to make sure that each student is having a positive experience in school. We know that behaviors are communication, a form of communication. So when we see behaviors that are problematic, again, we need to ask why. We need to find out what are the needs of each of our students to make sure that BCPS is a place where they can thrive. So again, I would just say in general, in summary, we look at that same data that a school leader would look at, the same, really the same data that you all have reported to you on the board.
Thank you so much. And for my final question, you just mentioned like how we can support students. And I was wondering, just for a clarifying question, I recognize like the financial and the logistic barriers with the student mentorship program, but when it is being implemented, is student involvement in the mentorship like contingent on a specific criteria, or is it when, as I think you previously mentioned, like when young Black boys are in middle school, they are automatically in that mentorship, or does it follow an intervention or engaging through equity liaisons? And then if so, is there just a way that we can make sure that those mentorship opportunities are available and accessible to all students, especially for those who may not fall traditionally under a specific intervention program, if that's the current method we implemented?
Thank you so much for that. It's definitely something I'm passionate about too, Mashika Kalu. So one of the models that I really, and we saw this with one of our schools that was piloting in the MSDE program, the way they actually had a diverse group, because and I hear you talking about the peer mentoring aspect. So yes, you certainly had adult mentors, but it was really key that, that students saw each other as mentors as well. So they may have students who actually did, or are successful academically or high achieving, if you will. And they may have students who are struggling a bit academically. So what can, that student that's struggling learn from their peer who is, experiencing some academic success? So that's one aspect that I thought was really key to really have a heterogeneous mix in those mentoring groups. Also to be like, if we focused quite a bit on middle school. So the idea that a student can move from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade to be in mentoring, I think is key as well. So that's another aspect that I really think is valuable. Happy to report, I went to high school recently, and there was a student who was a freshman. He remembered me from when he was in his mentoring program in middle school. So when I used to come to the school and participate in some of their meetings and whatnot. So the other thing you pointed out that I think is key, whereas, to do the work across the system certainly would take considerable resources. You're probably looking at staff that work system-wide, focused on mentoring, considerable funding, as you mentioned, to support activities, what have you. I would say, if you, any other board members, committee members, if you know of schools that are in need, and this is where we get, outreach from schools directly, we'll try to partner with them to provide support however we can. Sometimes there's not money to take, say, the field trips and experiences, but, can we help to bring speakers in? Can we join in again in their meetings on a regular basis? CCBC, we partner with them, they picked up transportation costs to get to their campus. So the way we're structured now, we really look to see what the individual needs are in the school. So when you ask, how does a student get referred to a mentoring program, it does vary by school. We certainly defer to the school on how they want to select students to be a part of the mentoring. And then we see how, we can provide resources and support from my team, from partners best we can.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the clarity you provided, and it's really just encouraging to hear that these efforts are just being made within the school system. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? So again, Mr. Handy, thank you for your work today with the presentation. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you to you and your team. Appreciate how you have also worked with us as a board in sessions on equity, and looking forward to doing that again with you this year. So if that is it for today, the last item on the agenda is announcements. So the next Equity Committee meeting with the Equity Council is scheduled for Thursday, January 30th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. The next Equity Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, February 13th, 2025 at 4 p.m. Is there any further business? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good night,
Good evening.
everyone.
Good night.